So speaking of the propaganda that has been raining down upon Western citizens regarding President Zelensky and the war in Ukraine, from the very beginning, we have a trailer of a new film produced by Sean Penn that we are very eager to share with you. Let's first remind you, though, of the context of the latest developments this week, which are that there is great fear on the part of the U.S. foreign policy establishment that polling data now shows that a majority of Americans don't want any more money going to Ukraine. And this is happening throughout governments in the West. The populations are starting to realize that they were constantly lied to and told the Russian government was days away from collapsing, that their supplies were being cut off, that they didn't have any support, that their ruble was collapsing, that they weren't going to be able to fund this war, and they continue to occupy roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory, are dug in extreme trenches, and if this war is going to end in Ukraine's favor by expelling the Russians from Ukraine, it will not be for very long into the future until that happens, and in the meantime, Ukraine will be destroyed, Ukrainians will die in record numbers, as will Russians, and the only people who will benefit are arms dealers and the arms industry and the intelligence communities that serve them. And as a result of this fear, President Zelensky this week said that he wants and expects the United States government to essentially create a relationship with Ukraine based on the model that the United States has with Israel. The model that the United States has with Israel is that we have an absolute guarantee to provide Israel with billions of dollars a year. The last deal was signed in 2016 by the Obama administration under a Congress that was bipartisan. I believe the House was controlled by the Republicans. The Senate might have been, I don't remember, but there was huge bipartisan support for the deal Obama signed with Prime Minister Netanyahu to give $38 billion in U.S. funds to Israel over the next 10 years, much of which is used, or some of which is used to purchase weapons from the American arms industry, but most of which is used to strengthen the Israeli military industry and to enable Israel to maintain military superiority over its neighbors. President Zelensky said he wants Ukraine to be in that same position, namely that both parties are on board with it, that it is a 10-year guarantee, that the money, billions of dollars, will flow in, because what he is afraid of is that in 2024, Americans will have a choice. There will be a Democratic nominee called Joe Biden who wants to fund the war in Ukraine until the very end with no end in sight. They don't want to win the war, they want to protract the war. The goal is not to defend Ukraine, the goal is to destroy Russia. The goal is to destroy Russia. And so the longer the war goes on, the better it is for the United States. That's why they're not giving Ukraine everything, they're giving them just enough, just like they did in Syria, to ensure that the country is destroyed and the war goes on, but no side ever wins. And they're very worried that you'll have Joe Biden over here and Donald Trump over here, or maybe even Vivek Ramaswamy or Ron DeSantis, who runs on the opposite platform of saying we want to cut off funds to the war in Ukraine because we don't think that money should be going there any longer. And as we demonstrated last night in the segment we did on Nikki Haley, the goal of trying to desperately find somebody like Nikki Haley or Chris Christie or Mike Pence to become the Republican nominee is to ensure that you don't have that choice. That both parties are in full agreement on this foreign policy goal of supporting Ukraine into the end, of encircling China, of a Cold War with China, and of militarism in general. And that's what Zelensky wants. And so, lo and behold, at exactly the moment that the war in Ukraine and support for it in the West is starting to seriously erode, a trailer is released by the actor Sean Penn, who was already working on a hagiography, a worshipful documentary about President Zelensky months before the Russian invasion in February of 2022. He so happened, coincidentally, to be in Kiev with a camera crew on the day that Russia invaded. And as you'll see in the trailer, it's nominally about the bravery of the Ukrainians, the justness of the cause of their war, the supreme greatness of President Zelensky, but it's really about Sean Penn's courage, Sean Penn's grit, Sean Penn's integrity, Sean Penn's manliness, Sean Penn's greatness. And there's an amazing cameo appearance as well by Sean Hannity. So let's take a look at this trailer of this film that is about to be released.
Sometimes in pursuing a curiosity about something going on in the world, maybe part of it is because you're looking to believe in something. There are people that you meet who are the embodiment.
But it's important to note that this is not an independent film. It has a gigantic media corporation behind it called Paramount, which is the owner of CBS, among other things. And obviously it is a longtime major studio in Hollywood. And it's the kind of studio, the kind of company that only allows propaganda that aligns with the U.S. security state to be released. So that's who's funding this film.
Of that hope that you want to have.
The film we'd set out to make was not meant to encounter an existential threat to democracy, just a spirited story of a comedy superstar turned president.
Be careful. We're currently in this situation where there's a major Russian buildup.
The situation was changing and feeling more urgent.
Go.
They had 2 impacts in town.
Oh my God.
This modern country was suddenly at war.
Ukrainians have this historical willingness to be a democratic state. And because it is so hard to get, it becomes very precious.
This is about vengeance. Putin's angry that this country wants to divorce itself from Russia forever, and he wants it back.
Now, right here on the screen, you see that Sean Penn was in Ukraine on the very first day of the Russian invasion. So let's watch from there.
They had 2 impacts in town.
Oh my God.
This modern country was suddenly at war.
Ukrainians have this historical willingness to be a democratic state. And because it is so hard to get, it becomes very precious.
This is about vengeance. Putin's angry that this country wants to divorce itself from Russia forever, and he wants it back.
All right, so there you see Sean Penn. He's there on the first night of the invasion with Zelensky in his quote-unquote bunker. And there you see Sean Penn.
We are just ordinary people who want to live in our country.
Welcome to my home.
What can we help you carry?
We need Americans to understand the price we have to pay to be free.
Because of our proximity to active combat, that's the priority.
Guys, no grass. These fields are mine.
When you step into a country of such incredible unity, you realize what we've all been missing. We're in agreement. We absolutely agree.
I mean, that is a microcosm of the unbelievable change in ideology. Sean Penn has spent his life essentially as a leftist. He used to be very close friends with the Venezuelan leader, Hugo Chavez. And over time, Sean Penn became something much different. He became a spokesman for the U.S. security state. I was at an event. There was a pretty small event in Hollywood in early 2013, just before the Snowden reporting began. And it was an event organized for what was supposed to be the Hollywood left about foreign policy and economic policy. There were a lot of A-list names in that room. There were about 60 people there. And Sean Penn was one of them. And most of the people in that room were opposed to Obama's war on terror, his use of drones to indiscriminately kill people, and yet Sean Penn angrily attacked anybody who criticized President Obama, said that he knew things that nobody else knew, that he had been taken to Pakistan and shown the truth that anybody questioning President Obama didn't know, and he was there to defend CIA dirty wars all throughout the war on terror, and this is a continuation of his alignment, as is Hollywood aligned with the U.S. security state. And while most primetime hosts on Fox, Tucker Carlson before he was fired particularly, but also Laura Ingraham and Jesse Waters, have questioned or opposed the U.S. security state's role in Ukraine, Sean Hannity is a vocal defender of the Biden administration policy, which makes sense because Sean Hannity has been defending every war going back to the earliest ones of the Bush-Cheney neocon administration in 2001 and 2002. So he's very consistent, yet here you see him having completely common cause to the point of physical contact with a person who I'll bet you any amount of money Sean Hannity has called all sorts of names over the years.
When you step into a country of such incredible unity, you realize what we've all been missing. We're in agreement. We absolutely agree.
Ukraine fails, it's not just a failure for democracy.
Everything that happens here is going to affect every other place in the world today. That's the reason that we're all so invested in this.
When stakes are so high, of course we will keep fighting, whatever it takes.
Now, just to interrupt and point out one just completely deceitful propagandistic premise of this entire film, Ukraine is not a united country. Virtually all of eastern Ukraine has been in a civil war since 2014 with the government in Kiev. Ever since Victoria Nuland and the State Department she served under John Kerry in the Obama administration connived to remove the Ukrainian leader who had been elected to a 5-year term that was going to expire in 2015 because of a perception that he was getting too friendly to Moscow and too defiant to the West. And I believe some of that footage that was designed to look like it was war footage from Kiev was actually footage of those anti-government protesters in Maidan Square in 2014 protesting the government when John McCain and Chris Murphy and other U.S. officials, including Victoria Nuland, went to openly encourage them to use violence to remove the democratically elected government. And ever since then, Eastern Ukrainians who are Russian ethnically and who's Russian speaking and who have felt repressed by the pro-Western government in Kiev have been essentially in a civil war with Western Ukrainians for their independence and their sovereignty, backed by Russia. And so this idea that Ukraine is completely unified because Sean Penn went to Kiev or other parts of Western Ukraine, I don't know if he went to Eastern Ukraine or not, but there's no way to know anything about this country and to claim that it's completely united against the Russians, unless you're deliberately lying.
Zelensky is the face of this extraordinary courage that's come up in all the Ukrainians we saw and talked to, whether they were in uniform, out of uniform, school teachers, even children.
I want to protect my country, my mom, my family.
The Ukrainians will win this. The question is, at what cost? You were born for this moment.
I'm ready to win.
All right, so that's incredibly exciting. It's coming out September 18th. It's from Paramount. There you see Sean Penn and Sean Hannity, two of the wealthiest Americans in the country, both agreeing that we need to spend billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine without end. While people like Sean Hannity believe that there's no money for basic subsistence for the poorest people in the country. That has been the pre-Trump Republican ideology that Sean Hannity, pretty much alone at Fox, continues to voice, at least in terms of prime time, which is one of the reasons you'd have the bizarre spectacle, which you would never see at CNN or MSNBC, where there's no dissent allowed, of the 8 o'clock show with Tucker Carlson coming on night after night, condemning the war in Ukraine and the U.S. role in it, and then right at 9 o'clock, Sean Hannity coming on and doing exactly the opposite. He would wear a CIA pin or a Ukraine pin on his lapel, Sean Hannity would. But that got taken care of when they fired Tucker Carlson. And now this is the ideology that prevails at Fox News. And there you see him hugging or shaking hands, manly shaking of hands with Sean Penn in full agreement over this propagandistic lie to which the West has been subjected from the very beginning. But finally, Americans are starting to see the truth. And that's the reason Americans now, in a majority, oppose further funds to the war in Ukraine, and why the only people gaining traction in the Republican Party are candidates who say they want to stop the flow of money to Ukraine, stop fueling this war, and facilitate a diplomatic resolution. So this propaganda from Paramount, from Sean Penn, strangely coordinated well before the war began to create this hagiography about Zelensky and the cause of the Western Ukrainians against Vladimir Putin and the Russians is about to drop at the key moment. I don't think it's going to matter, though. I think Americans and people in the West are starting to understand that this war has nothing to do with them, except that it's prejudicing their lives, their financial prosperity, and that they've been lied to yet again. This is yet another war where Americans were deceived into supporting it by the very same liars that always deceive them into supporting wars, and the media outlets who went on board with it, only for them to realize, just like I knew was going to happen, that they had been deceived and that the war was a mistake. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.